Well, the Enyobeni Tavern tragedy in the Eastern Cape, where scores of teenagers died, has sparked debate about alcohol regulations. Now, the Southern African Alcohol Policy Alliance is proposing significant changes.
Now, for more on this, we're joined now by the Alliance's director, Maurice Smithers. A very good morning to you, Maurice, and thank you so much for your time here on the South African Morning. So, of course, some of the regulations, one of the main regulations that you're hoping for is the raising of the alcohol age limit, at least to the age of 21. But I put it to you then to say the Enyobeni Tavern tragedy had teenagers as young as 13, between 13 and 17 are the teenagers that died, and that is below the current age of 18. So what point is it going to, or rather what good is it going to do to raise the alcohol age when you still do have teenagers younger than the current age still drinking?
Absolutely. Good morning, and good morning to your viewers. You know, you're absolutely right, and that's the question we raised as well when the president, shortly after the Enyobeni Tavern shootings, not the Enyobeni tragedy, shortly after that the president himself said, you know, let's look at raising the age of drinking. And we said the point about raising the age of drinking, it cannot be done on its own, because the same children are unlikely to not go to the tavern just because the age gets raised to 21. So we argue, and the government actually is well aware of this, because government has a policy of 2016 that was adopted by Cabinet, and a liquor amendment bill which addresses this very issue. We argue that you have to do, there's a whole raft of measures you have to take at the same time. Sure, increase the age of drinking, there's good reasons for doing that, but there's a bunch of other things that have got to be done at the same time. Otherwise, raising the age will have no impact.
Yeah. You know, Maurice, as you're speaking about this, I mean, some of those recommendations also includes around excise tax, right? And also the enactment and the enforcement of bans and comprehensive restrictions as well. You know, when you're looking at it holistically, it also speaks to a bigger societal problem, right? It's one thing to be able to enforce laws and regulations and actually impose it onto tavern owners or alcohol owners or establishments that they actually need to be able to enforce these laws. But I wonder, what can we do more from a societal perspective where a child who's 13 years of age, and I'm deliberately saying child, 13 years of age, could have other alternatives as opposed to being in a tavern in the middle of the night on a Friday or a Saturday evening? Surely that child should have other means of being able to keep themselves entertained other than having to go to a tavern for a source of entertainment or enlightenment for that matter.
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the questions we have to ask is, how is it, what has happened in that child's life that has led that child to believe that the way to celebrate the beginning of school holidays is to go to a tavern? And the answer is that the child has been almost, you can argue, brainwashed into believing that alcohol is a necessary and inevitable part of life, and that alcohol is necessarily associated with celebration. Now, how does that happen? Well, it happens through advertising. It happens through poor adult modeling. It happens through peer pressure. It happens through the fact that they walk through the streets and see far too many liquor outlets available in their neighborhoods. There's a whole range of social factors that lead to this, and in addition to that, there isn't equitable access in the country to recreational facilities, sports facilities, libraries, and so on. The inequities of apartheid continue today, where you will find that in areas, historically privileged areas, like white areas in most cities, there are many more recreational facilities, libraries, and so on per head of population than there are in the black areas. So it's inevitable that, you know, if kids haven't got any other alternatives, and if they've been exposed to this idea that alcohol must be part of their lives, it's inevitable that they're going to go there. That's why you have to have this whole of government approach. You have to actually accept that a whole set of steps are necessary, and that all government departments have to be involved, because there are going to be consequences of any kind of legislation. For example, if you introduce legislation that says you want to limit the number of liquor outlets, or you want to move liquor outlets away from near to schools, what are those people going to do? So you have to have a department like small business development that is going to assist those people to transition to doing other economic activities. So there's a whole range of things that have to be done, but we need the political will. We need cabinet as a whole. This is why we've written to every single member in cabinet, saying that we need this whole of government approach. We need a government that doesn't. That's not. We currently have a government that is proposing having alcohol available in schools for fundraising purposes. All of these are contributing to the current culture, and if that doesn't change, then the problems won't go away. And one of the things we've wondered actually is why nobody is asking the Minister of Trade and Industry these questions, because ever since even before COVID, we've never once actually heard the Minister of Trade and Industry and Competition asked what is happening to the Liquor Amendment Bill, which was initially approved by Cabinet back in 2016 and hasn't been heard of since.
You've touched on an industry that will probably be raising its eyebrows to say, but come on, why do you always come for us? We are a billion-rand industry that, we abide by the regulations that have been put before us. And I speak of the advertising industry, to say that we're just doing a job here. And we are asked to make sure that we make it very clear that alcohol should not be consumed by people who are below the age of 18. And I mean, if you want us to say more, we will continue to say more, but we cannot actually go there and take the alcohol out of a 13-year-old's hand. So the advertising industry will say, Maurice, what do you want from us?
Well, I'm sorry to say this, but on your very station, about 3 weeks ago, I was watching, not on this particular station, on one of the ETV channels, either ETV or one of the movie channels. About 3 weeks ago, I was watching television on a Sunday afternoon. The movie was the sequel to Umanji, which is a child's movie. It was at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Sunday, and every second ad break during that movie had an alcohol ad. The alcohol industry does not stick to its own rules. That's the problem. We, in fact, believe that the advertising industry, particularly in relation to alcohol, should not be self-regulated, because it's not in the interests of the liquor industry to self-regulate themselves to the point that it impacts on their bottom line. It impacts on their profits. That's why we argue that there should be some kind of, either that alcohol advertising should be banned altogether in the same way that tobacco advertising is banned, or so severely limited that young people cannot actually be exposed to it. But the control over that, I'm afraid, has to be done by government, because the liquor industry is simply not going to do it. I read a statistic the other day. I think in 1990, the AB InBev, who are currently the owners of SA Breweries, spent 30 times the amount of money on advertising than they did on social messaging around the harms of alcohol. So if you're a young person, if you're an older person, and you are confronted with 30 times the number of messages encouraging you to drink, glamorizing alcohol, popularizing alcohol, than adverts that are saying to don't drink and drive, or drink responsibly, as the liquor industry likes to say, the influence on you is going to be much more skewed towards the messaging that is encouraging you to drink. So the liquor industry cannot regulate itself in regard to advertising, nor in fact to anything else in related to alcohol. So government actually has to take responsibility, because government has to protect people from an industry that wants to make money. You said it's a multi-billion rand industry. Indeed it is. And it's an avaricious industry. Currently, they've recognized that the liquor industry prospects in Europe and North America have plateaued. They cannot increase the number of people that are drinking in those territories. So they have said, and this is public knowledge, it's been in a number of newspaper articles, they have said that Africa and Asia are their next growth markets. And Africa is a growth market. South Africa, only 31% of people aged 15 and above actually drink alcohol. There are some countries in Africa where even less, between 20 and 25% of the population actually drink. That is an invitation to the liquor industry to move in to do more aggressive advertising, more aggressive promotion, more buying off of government and the authorities in those countries, more establishing of competitive breweries and so on, in order to actually capture a larger market. Women don't drink as much as men. So if you look at the advertising, if you look at the kind of drinks that are being sold today, the liquor industry is trying to make drinks that are more attractive to women. They have to be controlled. Nobody's saying they shouldn't exist. We are not calling for a ban on alcohol. But what we are saying is, as Thomas Barbour and various other researchers said, alcohol is no ordinary commodity. You've got to treat it differently to other commodities. You cannot treat it as though it's a pair of shoes or a bag of flour.
Yeah,
it has major consequences for society, and it has to be managed correctly.
Maurice, as you're speaking about how it's not like any other consumable, right? It's not a commodity that is just an ordinary sort of commodity. And going back to the fact that this is a R1 billion or even perhaps even $1 billion industry. With a $1 billion industry means that they've got interested and invested parties, which the question then becomes, would you think there's even political will to enforce some of these policies that were articulated as far back as, 2017 or 2016, actually, when Cabinet actually made the approval of it? So is there political will to enforce these regulations, which are run by invested parties, interested parties, who at the end of the day just want to make sure that they maximize on profits at the lowest input cost as possible?
We're not sure. There appears to be, on occasion, there appears to be some sense of political will. I mean, last year, in January, after the president had presented the ANC's 8th of January speech, he was interviewed by the Sunday Times, I think, and he himself said the ANC January 8th statement had said that new legislation was needed. And then he said in this interview that definitely new legislation is needed. And he in fact mentioned 4 things that could be done. The one was the raising of the drinking age. The other was increasing the tax on alcohol. The third was limiting the number of the operating hours. And the fourth was limiting advertising. So whether that represents political will or an understanding of what has to be done, not backed up by political will, we can't tell. What we do know is that there are ministers who make their decisions based on the narrow interests of their own portfolios. And the reason we know this is because the Minister of Transport, Fikile Mbalula, himself said a couple of years back during COVID, when the whole issue of alcohol became so pronounced during COVID, he said that he believed that something should be done to curb alcohol, including looking at limiting advertising on alcohol. But he admitted that back in 2013, when the Department of Health introduced the Control of Marketing of Alcoholic Beverages Bill, he opposed it because he was the Minister of Sport and because the sporting community would be adversely affected by the withdrawal of sponsorships by liquor companies. So unless we get a government that as a whole recognizes that something has to be done about the issue and that the consequences of introducing new legislation, of introducing new measures to deal with alcohol must be confronted rather than be used as an excuse for saying we can't do it because it's going to result in a loss of jobs, or it's going to result in a decline in the economy. But, we also have to remember that in 2017, when the Liquor Amendment Bill was presented to NEDLAC, the business and labor partners said they wanted a new socio-economic impact assessment to be done. So that was done by a company called Genesis Analytics, a very, very comprehensive study that was done, more than 100 pages in the final report. And they made it clear that despite the unintended consequences of this new legislation, it would save lives, 185 lives a year, and it would actually lead to a general reduction in excessive consumption of alcohol, and therefore they recommended it should be done. Government's just got to bite the bullet. They've just got to accept that it's a problem. They've got to bite the bullet, and they've got to deal with the outcomes in the same way that they did with tobacco.
Yeah.
At the time that they wanted to ban tobacco advertising, exactly the same arguments were put forward, because at that time the tobacco industry was funding sport, it was funding cultural activities, it was creating jobs, etc. The same arguments were used, but government went ahead. They had the political will to deal with tobacco, which, by the way, causes a far less harm to society than alcohol does, far less. So why they cannot do it with alcohol, we don't really understand, but it has to be done.